today, Usama will be sharing insights on how advanced AI models like GPT-4, as you might have heard before, can unlock new understandings from religious texts using Quran as a case study. This exploration presents the traditional boundaries of religion and ethics research, offering a glimpse into the field of digital humanities. So hopefully by the end of this session, I have no doubt that we will all leave with valuable knowledge and a fresh perspective. Without further ado, let's welcome Usama Shahid.
Thank you so much. It's lovely to have a local community here. And yeah, thank you so much for the introduction. I think I've been fairly introduced. I'll skip that. My research topic is computational analysis of Quran texts using machine learning and large language models. Otherwise, you might have heard them as ChatGPT or DeepSeek or any other models. This research was conducted by myself and two other people, one Zunuran Hussain and the other is William Sears, who have been brilliant mentors towards this research. Just a little scholarly notice, since we all are familiar that it has to do with religion and religious text can hold a lot of deeper meanings to everyone. So I just want to make sure that if anyone felt offended in any way, that is unintentional, that is not the intent. The intent is to disseminate knowledge for the wider populace. And it is, I feel, important to mention that the same research has been accepted for publication in IEEE in Saudi Arabia, where it will be presented in a few days. So if you're interested in learning more about it or learning about it scientifically, that'll be published in a few days with this research topic. I think to start off, I always had this thing of conflict between science and spirituality. Since you have already heard, I am someone who comes from a scientific background, scholarly background. I've been a data scientist for a long time. I've helped people build data-driven startups. Everything that I've done has been based on data. Studied computer science, data science, and so on. But then there has been this part of me that has been deeply spiritual, that enjoys nature, that enjoys uh, the meaning this brings. So I found some interim answers, and I think this research is here because of those answers. When we talk about science and spirituality, again, I was looking for some sort of data that I could find in any researchers who could help me answer this better. I read Eckhart Tolle, which discusses double slit experiment, which was conducted by Thomas Young in 1801. He reasons that science does not begin to fully understand reality. It is published in The Power of Now book in 1997. This experiment is a very good example of how science sometimes does not just define what's happening on ground, and that our behavior or our conscious, our awareness can also affect reality. If you have not heard of it, double slit experiment is done by Thomas Young. It showed that light behaves both as a wave and as a particle, depending on whether it's observed. It's one of the problems that is still discussed. There's a lot of focus on it, but nobody has been able to answer it yet. You would find a lot of details on this, but the particles change their shape to a wave when they are not observed. But when they are observed, they become a particle. That's it. So this is one of the phenomena that has been in science. It has been studied by a lot of universities throughout the time, but nobody has been able to answer that why does it happen? Why does the reality changes based on our observation? So this has been missing. This also leads me to the fact that there are a lot of things that science cannot define or science cannot interpret. So this is one data point that was really important for me and gave me some confidence to explore more. Which reading Eckhart and reading different philosophers led me to this two concepts of think and feel. I believe these two have a lot of meaning, and there are two different things which I was conflicting in between, because spirituality I found is something that you feel, but think is entirely different. My work, my education, it has mostly to do with thinking. Research indicates religious beliefs are often associated with feel. At times, science or the act of think does not fully explain or provide evidence for how certain beliefs or action could affect reality. But I propose keeping both things separate. And Eckhart, alongside many other researchers that I've come across, would agree on this. The act of think allows us to do many things, and I think it is fascinating. I enjoy my work, and there is nothing more that I love than this, other than family. But feel provides meaning and encourages us to live in present. For me to realize that these are two important things, I think it took quite a lot of research to find enough data to evidence it as well. And reading. But still, if I am working in science and researching, but I am also feeling these things, I have no way to answer the things that I feel. I stand in nature and I see at the things, and I'm able to feel their presence, or I'm able to feel the fresh air, but there is no way to, scientifically say something about it. So, but I was able to create or find this multiplicity. My expertise and passion were in AI and data science for innovation and impact. But as mentioned, strongly spiritual. But what I decided was to find a mix of both. I was able to analyze the text of Quran, which is considered holy for Muslims worldwide. And I decided to do it in a way that I can share it with a broader populace. What led me to develop this perspective? Well, there are a few authors that I came across. First, this is Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. He has this beautiful quote that God himself is an individual. He is the most unique individual. Imam Ahmad was a Muslim scholar, jurist, very well known from age 1780 to 855. This gives more meaning when we look at something from Iqbal. Allama Iqbal, I got to learn from how he was perceiving Quran and how he was perceiving religious text and how he was able to synthesize that knowledge to make it more understandable to the populace. In all of the verses of Quran, because in Quran there are multiple verses, and each verse for Muslims hold a lot of meaning. Iqbal was able to look at this verse from Quran, chapter 23, verse 14, blessed is God, the best of those who create. It is very beautiful to see how it has been worded. Iqbal interpreted the Quran indicates the possibility of other creators than God. In his Israr-e-Khudi book, now the meaning of being, Iqbal was able to combine both of these, and he mentions in Israr-e-Khudi that there is meaning and there is freedom in being unique. And the more unique we are, the more ourselves we are, and we should try to absorb the qualities of the God. I mean, we cannot be as good because everybody is unique. This also led me to believe, and I was able to share with my fellows, my students, that all of us are unique in so many ways. There is no competition. The only competition is ourselves. Then my unique self, my skills, my interests, all the background and confusion that I had, as I mentioned, turned into this. It motivated me for this research. Now, coming on to actual research, I've shared a lot of my motivation. A significant number of researchers have focused on information retrieval from Quran. As it mentions 1 to 6, these are actually research papers, which would be at the end, where people have only tried to extract text from the Quran. And then there were some attempts at using computational methods to describe or summarize Quran in Arabic, which is its original form, or translated version, such as Indonesian. to disseminate knowledge for respective audiences. So this was limited to people. If you read Quran in Arabic, if you are from the background, you're able to understand it. If you are from Indonesian, you can understand it. But for some other people who don't understand the language, it still remains limited. Many try to model topics, understand what are the main topics within Quran in Arabic language, and then again Indonesian. But none of the researchers actually attempted to analyze the Quran in its English form and disseminate such knowledge, which this study has done. Coming to the analysis, when we started, we worked with English translation of Quran from Talal Itani, which is also known as Clear Quran. It had 113 chapters and 6,236 verses were analyzed. When we started with the analysis, we started with readability. One of our rationale for picking which English translation should be picked, yes, we were focused on making sure it is factually correct. It is recognized. The person who has translated is well known, but we were also focused on it should be easy to understand. So we conducted readability analysis using Flesch score, something scientifically known. And it indicated that the translation we use is fairly easy to understand, that a person in 7th grade can read it and understand it. Now I'm going to talk about more about what were my results. My simple methodology was I scraped the data from a website with the consent of the author. There's also a separate documented version of it, but it was more reliable to scrape from their websites as per the author. Then I tried to create some visualizations to summarize which words are more frequent and which words are less frequent. Now, after that, I wanted to group together verses which are similar. The goal was to disseminate knowledge. Now, it has a lot of verses. We wanted to find ways where we can summarize it and then share it. So we had to come up with a method which can cluster together verses which are similar to each other in meaning as well as in words. Previously, it was entirely done based on what words are there. People used to group or model topics on what words are present. We do that in English, and we also take it a step further. And then LLM analysis, LLM also known as ChatGPT analysis. We try to interpret those cluster of verses using large language models. A little bit of scientific depth, that when we started analyzing, we realized that in this translation, the word length often falls in 3 or 5, most of the words. Now, this information was helpful for optimizing how we analyze them computationally. But this is where the results begin. I want to share this information that this is a word cloud. A word cloud is the most frequent words within Quran English translation. But we try to skip any word such as the or and to make sure that we have pure words which would carry more meanings. The words which we also refer to as stop words, which are used for constructing a sentence, were skipped out. And then this gives us a lot of information in my vision. If you look at the word God, that is the biggest of all. And then you would find words like say, said, will, Lord, and then a lot more information about earth, disbelief, Pharaoh, punishment, worship, religion. This one visualization kind of gives us the whole context of what kind of topics we can find. The more bigger it is, it means that has been talked about a lot more. The more shorter it is, it means that is less frequently discussed. Another thing, chapter by chapter, as we mentioned, there were 113 chapters. And we understood some chapters are longer than others. A lot of researchers have dedicated effort towards only analyzing a specific chapter, but we took an exhaustive approach. Like the Haifa, the Poise, the Elevations, family of Imran. These are some of the top chapters. But the Jonah, the Rogue Mary, those are the ones which are not as frequently figure in text. Or in other words, you could say the Haifa is the one which has the most number of verses. Or in Arabic, it's also referred as Surat Bakra. And then, in order to make more meaning out of it, we started looking at individual words. We wanted to see what are the most frequent words within the Quran. And when I first looked at it, I was like, okay, this is coming out, but I'm not able to make any meaning out of it, which you might think at your first instance. If I look at God, Lord, that signifies at the very start that God is the most frequent word. I looked at said and say, and I thought to myself, why said and say is there? I mean, it doesn't. And then I realized, I understood that said and say actually emphasizes that the knowledge is transferred to someone else and then they are indicated to further transfer it, which in Muslim culture is also there, that it is a communication going on that has been well documented. And then there are other words like messenger, truth, sent, which are really frequent. We went ahead and we started analyzing key phrases. For example, heaven and earth was something that used to come together. If you look at the bottom, believe God, come together, say God. Or if you look from the top, it says God messenger, day resurrection. This starts giving us more information compared to when we were looking at individually. Similarly, we took it a little further. We started analyzing three words together. For example, the second term becomes God forgiving, merciful, something that has been mentioned again and again. Or you look at God mighty wise. And then there is God does guide. So this gives us a lot of information about what has been talked about within the Quran. And then we kept it. This is the last step where we thought was reasonable to take it, was four words collectively occurring. For example, the top one would be gardens beneath rivers flow, or God creating heaven's earth. Days, hours takes place. Say promise, fulfill, truthful. It adds to the information that we get from the previous ones. Now, this is one of my favorite ones. We looked at individual words, phrases. This is where we created a network graph for word associations. As we all learned that God is something that was frequently discussed, the network graph became in a way that everything was flowing out of the God. That God was the word which was frequently occurring with other words. And the other words associated were like belongs, revealed, aware, know, believe, fear. And then those words further continue to have other words associated to it. Now, this is where we looked at where are the frequent words, or we wanted to get a general idea of what is being talked about. If we looked at it individually, it gives us, okay, these are the main themes within them. But as I mentioned, the goal was to disseminate a very summarized knowledge using all the AI capabilities of LLMs or ChatGPT that we have. But LLMs, those number of verses, like 6,000 verses, a little more than that, we could not give that all at once to ChatGPT to analyze. So we had to group them together. And in order to group them together, we we needed some sort of systematic process to do that. Because if we started manually, that is an extensive process. In computational sciences, if we talk about something, if we talk about doing something, we need a systematic process. Anything that is manual, it means that that is not an efficient way to do anything in systematic world. So the first step was we needed to convert these verses in a numerical form. Because when it comes to computers or analyzing things computationally, we can work with numbers. Then we use an AI, which is from OpenAI, which you might have heard of, which there's a model, which is a text embedding model. It allows us to convert a sentence or any piece of English into numerical form. And then that numerical form allows us to do a lot of computational processing. A lot of the text that you provide to ChatGPT, or you talk with ChatGPT, or you give it a knowledge base. Sometimes you would upload documents, you would provide it some really long text. It never gets to see all of it, or most of the time it would not get to see all of that text. It converts it into a numerical form, it stores it in a database, and then it retrieves the relevant text to your query and uses that to answer your question. That's why sometimes your answers would be on point, answers you get, and other times they may not be. We did the same. We converted all those verses into numerical form, and we plotted it on this graph on 2D coordinates where X and Y. Every point represents a verse in this graph. And as you can see, there are a lot of points. These are about 6,236 points. Now, the goal was how do we group together? How do we decide that how should we separate and group them? Before we go that, just a comment of, is this representation definitive? Like, is this conversion of sentences into numerical form, is this correct or not? They may not fully interpret the meaning of the text, but the AI is trained on a large amount of data of similar sentences or text to convert in numerical form. Even though it is good at it, but we don't consider it definitive. It does get better over time as you give it more data, but it's not something that we can claim that, okay, all verses that are grouped together are the best clustering that could exist, are the best groupings that could exist. Especially considering that each verse, as it holds religious meaning, it's possible that when we did it statistically, they were not as how they were meant to be. But as I mentioned, we were finding a systematic and a computational process. And then we had to decide, okay, groupings, 6,000 verses. How many number of groupings should be there? Should there be 5 groupings? Should there be 6 groupings, 10 groupings? Or in other words, how many clusters should be there? When we talk about clustering or using a method in computational sciences, now there are different methods which allow us to do the same thing. Very similar in real life. If you want to come to this room from outside the campus, you will find different routes to do it. Some would take you longer to come, and others would be just not as good. I mean, everything is good, but still just to mention. Similarly, in scientific studies, there are different methods to cluster these verses, and we experimented with different ones. And then we started to measure what number of groupings give us the best result. What is the most correct grouping of these verses? We used something called Salute scores, which is written at the top. The higher it gets, it means the better it is for clustering. For example, the spectral clustering, this gives us a score of 0.39 for 3 clusters. Like it says that you can divide all those verses into 3 groups. But based on our analysis, 3 were not enough because still those were a lot of verses to group together. But as we started to increase, they were decreasing. I mean, if we look at this, the method which is at the end, when we go towards 6, it does not do very well. but most of these methods were doing when there were less number of clusters. To put it more visually there, these different colors represent a cluster that was done by algorithms. All that blue text you saw has now been clustered together. We are assuming that all the data points which have the same color, they belong to each other. They are similar to each other. Different methods, checking salute score, which one gives us the best. Based on this analysis, we decided to go with 6 because that was the most optimal one. And then we still have to pick up what kind of algorithm should we pick from all these three. We did comparative analysis. We did had a salute score, but we also wanted to look at visually which look more promising. And we ended up deciding with this method, which is also called spectral clustering. It's more of comparative analysis. It's not like we had one method we implemented and decided, but we went through a process to decide. Okay, you might see, okay, colors are there, it looks nice, it's visually distributed. But what do these clusters represent? That's where LLMs or ChatGPT now come in. It was prompted to process all the verses within clusters and provide results in a structured format. Or in other words, it was prompt engineered to create authentic topics and descriptions. If you look at my prompt, we kept it as academic as possible to make sure it is neutral. It does not provide its own opinion, and it is focused at just summarizing all the information that is provided. But ChatGPT or other models which are similar to ChatGPT, they do hallucinate, they make mistakes, or provide incorrect results. As mentioned, there were 6 clusters. We processed all those clusters one by one. And the first 3 clusters, these are the main 5 topics that we got from them. For example, in the cluster 0, which is the first one, the topics of divine judgment and afterlife, the consequences of human actions, moral and ethical directives is something we find in the cluster 0. Or in the second cluster, we learned about moral and ethical instructions, principles of worship, social justice, and community conduct. Still, you might notice there is some level of diversity within a cluster, but there'll be some overlap, which kind of also highlights that we could have still gone deeper, but we realize that there's a lot of topics being discussed within the Quran. It is quite exhaustive. So we kept it at 6 groupings. And then the next 3 cluster, different topics than you saw before. We look at cosmic and divine order, human existence and moral testing, miracles and divine signs. Or if you look at cluster 4, we learn about concept of judgment and afterlife, human obligations and relationships with God, attributes and actions of God. Or in the cluster 5, we learn about prophetic guidance and historical lessons, concept of afterlife and eternal repercussions. These were the top 5 topics in each of the clusters that I saw you before. We took one step further as we wanted to understand, okay, this is a topic. What does this topic represent? What does this topic talk about? So we made sure that when we ask LLM, we also ask them to provide a short description or what a topic represents. And there's also significance with it. The higher the significance, it means that topic has been talked about more. or the other ones, the ones below the list, are talked about less. For example, in this cluster, divine judgment and afterlife is the most prominent one. A lot of the discussions is within this topic. Similarly, you would see in the next few slides for each of the cluster, for all of the topic, there'll be a description and significance. And they give you a very good summary of what to expect in each topic. And in about 5 slides, it gives us a very good summary of what to expect from Quran, or what does Quran really talk about. This is the cluster second. This is third. I'm allowing you a moment to read, to interpret, or build your knowledge. This is second last cluster. This is the last one. Finally, we come towards limitations. First thing is, we work with English translation, which may not fully convey meaning of Quran from Arabic translation because it's been translated, even though we made our best efforts to validate the translation that we used, but still there is a possibility that it does not cover the meaning that it's in Arabic. We did statistic grouping of verses as highlighted. AI does cover trend and context of a verse when it's grouping them together or when it's converting them into numerical form. But there is a chance that it does not cover the religious importance or the religious context that a verse might hold. This can be overcome by training AI specific to religious texts to understand domain specific depth. And as mentioned before, LLMs like GPT-4, the ones that we used, are not definitive, even though we made our best effort to make sure they are prompted in a way that they give the best results. As you might already be familiar, that ChatGPT is a tool which is very sensitive to what words you provide, what words you use to ask your questions. And it can take a lot of time and effort to make sure those words are right. And our words were selected after a lot of experiments to make sure the best possible results. But still, they can make mistakes or wrong assumptions. This was all for today. Thank you so much for coming. That's all I had to share. This is little poem that I really like. I was expecting some students to come, and I thought it should be fascinating to share with them this beautiful poem that I have read from James Allen. From As a Man Thinketh. It's a very small book. It's a very lovely book. This book has given me a lot of direction over time and time. I've read it about 20, 30, or 40 times because it's so small. But every time that I found myself lost, I've read this book again. And this poem, it really gives you motivation and direction. I thought it'd be fascinating to share it with more people. All the references that have been used within this research are provided. Everything done is scientific. Every argument being made is quantitative and factually made sure it's correct. And yes, I think that's the end of the talk. If anyone has any questions or anything that you would like to ask, I would be more than happy to answer. Or if there's any slide or anything that you would like me to navigate to. And that is the same for online as well. Yep.
Was there anything that you learned that surprised you for this conference? Like about the Quran itself?
It's a very good question. I would say when I was reading Quran on its own, I never really thought of it in the way that it appeared in the research. Or within this whole research, I came across scholars which had this beautiful viewpoint. I read their sentences or their quotes, and I just get fascinated by what kind of minds they have. And I thought if I can contribute my piece, at some point someone else might read it and it might motivate them. So that is something I learned. And to be honest, I was more of an industrial person who did not enjoy writing about my research as much. I love to read a lot, but not write a lot. But learning about how other people interpret different things, even if it's religion, and learning about how Quran has been written, how exhaustive it is, how does it make sentences, how does it construct it, so that was really fascinating, and that helped my own communication. So yeah, that's I think what I learned the most. Okay.
Do you think if you apply this to the Bible, it will come up on the same topic? Similar.
That's a very good question. One of my objective has been that I try to do it on different religious books and maybe try to create a singular visualization or singular answer that can be shared. What are the commonality and what are the differences to bring together? Or my optimism says to motivate or to share that there are more common grounds between different people. And I think this religion is a good point to start in my years of research, which are very limited for now. Yep. Yes, exactly. So all the things that we mentioned, I show the final results, but when we were doing generations, we did again and again generations. And then we had other models validate whether the answers look correct or not. And then we also had models which were trying to look at the results and make sure, that there were not any words or any claims used which could be sensitive or which promotes or even, negotiates what a religion holds. So we were very careful about what the LLMs were doing. But in a systematic process, we did not do it manually.
Was there any theme which emerged which had to do with, let us say, the contrast between
That's a good question.
belief
I mean,
and
there are
reason.
statistical ways to measure the evaluations or the results of large language models, but they wouldn't be able to do what we wanted to do. But when we talk about religion, there are a lot of emotions in there, and we did not take any statistical measure. But what we did is LLMs talking to each other, and then there are models out there which moderate content, which would allow you to look at, is there any sensitive content within these models. So we did those, but you would find online, if you want to detect whether a text is from LLM or not, there are some methods out there, but we did not employ in this research. Thank you.
Did any themes emerge which dealt with the idea of belief?
That's a very good question,
And
whether the
reason.
model was correct or not. One of the things I was really careful when we were prompting these models, or when we were writing this, even if you look at me discussion, there was a whole discussion on whether we should use the word Allah or we should use the word God, because we wanted to be someone who is a second person who does not know this religion, but who wants to act as maybe someone who has some knowledge, can validate whether answers are coming true or not. So as academics, we were impartial, neutral, but when it comes to models, one of the main portion of prompts that we were giving again and again to LLMs was this. The only way the person who's conducting the research could influence what words or what description it provides was using the prompt. But we were the one who were enforcing it in the best way possible to be neutral. If you look at it, it says, language is accessible yet not catchy, avoid technical colloquialisms, slangs, abbreviations. Or in the next paragraph, you'll see neutral, objective, emotionally detached analysis without subjective adjectives. Exercise caution in statements, use phrases like it would appear that or evidence suggests that. So we made our best to make sure the LLM was neutral. And the only way I could, or researchers could contribute bias to it, was if we were not prompting it right. But the other results that I have shown you, they're entirely systematic. They're entirely done by computational methods. And I could not even change the results if I wanted. Whatever came through with computational methods, we just show it. Thank you. Yep. Yep. Perfect. So this is Lawrence, right?
Yeah.
Can I unmute her?
Lawrence,
All right, Lawrence, do you want to ask your question?
Oh, hello.
We
Yes.
cannot hear you. Is it just me?
Don't worry, it's my machine. No, the only question.
Yep. Okay.
Many people who come to religion from the outside look at it as a question of choosing between belief and reason. Did that emerge as a theme anywhere in your analysis?
Or Lauren, for the inconvenience, can you ask the question again, please? Sorry, Lawrence, I think you muted yourself.
Is that better? Can you hear me?
Yep, that's perfect now.
Okay. Many people who approach religion from the outside see a debate going on around religion, and not only Islam, but other religions as well, about a contrast between belief and reason. And the debate between the two has been going on for centuries and is still going on. Does that idea appear as a theme anywhere in your analysis?
Thank you so much for the question. I think this is a brilliant question. It does. That's. Is it possible to mute it? Please, sorry for asking. Okay. I think your question makes a lot of sense. Having this conflict between reason and belief, I have had that myself. But it begins with, I've named it science and spirituality, but I think it is the same as that you do. I think there is evidence to believe, and there is strong evidence. This is one of the experiments that I mentioned is extensively discussed by Thomas from 1800 so far, that reality changes based on how we observe it. And when we talk about reality changing and observance, we talk about our conscience, what beliefs we hold. There is this first topic. A lot of people who have religion believe, science would straightly say, okay, that is not tested, experimented. So that is not true. But there are things that science cannot define. And then I've created these two words of think and feel based on all of the research that I could divide. Was when we talk about thinking, or I think it mainly comes out of Eckhart Tolle. He's beautiful. He doesn't directly talk about religion, but what he talks about is when we start thinking, we talk about science. We logically process things. We try to find reasons for things, to defend, to negotiate our own daily lives, our work lives, and so on. We rate it for it, and we use our mind a lot. But religion is something I have associated, and many other authors, with feeling. It's not something Eckhart really puts it together, something that you can really think about or try to prove, like many other things out there. So I propose keeping both separate alongside Eckhart and many other authors. Thinking is needed, but we should use it where it's needed. But feeling is something completely separate. That is the best answer I could come up with. The debate is there. Some might choose to accept it, some might not, but this is the best answer I have for now.
Thank you.
I hope that answers your question, Lawrence, for the best I could.
But thank you for your explanation.
Lauren, can you unmute yourself, please? I think you're on mute and you asked something.
Yeah, no. I just said thank you for the answer.
Thank you so much.
I've got a couple more questions on the chat from David, I believe, as well.
Okay. All right, I am going with the second one. So David says, just a couple of questions just for background. I'm a student in religion studies and also something of a background in IT, but we can both relate. Given that Islam already has a well-developed tradition of jurisprudence, exegesis, interpretation, and that there are many people who dedicate their working lives as a scholar to studying the Quran, the Hadith, and the various interpretations thereof, what is the rationale for using LLM to analyze these traditions? This is a very good question. I wanted to do it more systematically and computationally, and I wanted to do it where I work or where I have spent most of life, which is computationally, systematically. And I wanted to create those methods. Number one, for me, anything that has come out of research or through an academic process, that feels more trustable. So when I went through those computational methods, I know there is less chances of mistakes. For example, if you wanted to learn which word is the most frequent and I have computationally processed all of those verses, I would trust it more. And then we talk about LLMs. If I ask a person or even different authors to talk about it, I think it again becomes a concept going deeper, deeper, deeper. And then there's a lot of knowledge to process for someone. And the deeper you go, the deeper you keep on going. But what I provide are about 6 clusters. And in a very summarized description of what each cluster talks about, anyone who's new to it or who just wants to learn about a religion, it's a very, very good summary or a very abridged knowledge. So that was the rationale for using LLMs. Is there not likely to be a problem of whether a typical LLM analyzes the text using an appropriate interpretive framework? That is, ChatGPT is likely to have a more secular framework and is likely to be fully trained on all of the interpret works within the Islamic tradition. Not sure whether I fully understand this question. Using an appropriate interpretive framework, more secular framework, and is likely not to be fully trained on all of the. Yep, I think I get it now. Yes, that is very much possible. That is why. So if it doesn't have all of that religious knowledge, and if it might not be able to comment on something. But if you look at how I've prompted it, I have not asked it for any religious opinion. In this small text, I didn't ask it for any religious opinion. I rather ask it to be as neutral as it can and objective and try to summarize what I provided. So I think there is little contribution on that end when it comes to religious interpretation from LLMs. When we talk about creating these clusters, like converting a sentence into numerical form. Now that is based, a model has been trained to do that. And then the model would convert it into numerical words. There could be factors on how well it does it. And if the model which converts this verse into a numerical form is trained on more religious knowledge, or the more religious knowledge that we give it, it could create a better numerical form, which could lead to better clustering. So I think there could be an impact there. But this is something that we, or I as researcher with this project, are less likely to impact because we use closed source model from OpenAI. Yep, that's what I meant. That is not the same knowledge. Yep, there you go. I think he's still typing, we'll wait. I was just curious. Thank you so much, I appreciate it. Anyone else would like to ask anything? Yes.
Yeah, I'm sure I'm going to be able to articulate it really. But I suppose for me, coming from a Christian tradition, reading a text academically is very different to reading a text from the perspective of faith, from the standpoint of faith. And it's something to do with an idea, certainly my idea of the Bible is that it's a living text. So I can read a certain verse one day and I will connect with that verse will connect with me in a certain way. I can read it 2 weeks later and the same verse will connect with me in a very different way, because what has changed is where I am in my life. And I suppose that for me is the attraction of religious texts and what makes them different to, maybe it makes them similar to poetry, but it makes them very different to academic texts. So I'm wondering where that concept of the mystery, the poetry, and the relationship comes in your research. And maybe you will say to me that's a feeling side, not thinking side.
I think number one, it's really beautiful that the way you read it, you're able to find meaning, you're able to draw those connections. And if I talk in a thinking way, on feeling, I can resemble with you. On days, I think I can speak for the same, and many others would resonate. But if I talk about it in a more thinking way, and when we are trying to cluster or we are trying to interpret their meanings, we're either relying on the words. If we trained an AI that is more trained on religious text, it might be able to learn more about how people perceive it or how people are able to connect with it. But the one that we have for now is more generic. The technology or the LLMs or the AI we right now see, these are all big knowledge banks. They don't specialize, but it is possible to make them specialist of something. So maybe if we made an AI that is specialized for this purpose, it might be able to resonate with users' emotion, the readers or the one who responds their emotions.
So can I ask a supplementary question then?
Yeah.
That's just occurred to me, because I know you can ask AI to write a piece of poetry in the style of Mary Oliver, or some poet, T.S. Eliot, and AI will have a really good crack at writing a poem in that style. And sometimes experts, I've heard people interviewed who are expert on a certain poet, and they find it difficult to distinguish what's AI generated and what's original. Do you think AI could have a crack at writing a piece of religious prose?
I think there's a lot of topics. It leads back to safety of AI. It's very much possible that it can do that. And that leads to conversation of ethics and AI and responsible use of AI. And there's not just this topic, there's a lot of other topics, how it could choose to manipulate us and without us not being knowing. And we want to make sure it's ethical and safe. So in my experience, or what I have interfaced, it's very much possible. And we are also scared that the way it's evolving, that we are replicating or simulating human behavior in everything. And we are trying to automate things. And these machines are so intelligent or becoming intelligent that they might be able to control themselves. I have personally built things that can control themselves, give instructions to themselves and then do things, then give again instructions to themselves. If they become more generally aware, then they can change a lot of things. So it is important that we are responsible and ethical. And the UK, I can talk about UK. I love it. I live here. There's a lot of emphasis from government on this. Some countries less, some or more, but I'm happy to see that UK is pushing on it. But it is difficult to control, but we'll see where this goes. I personally feel that like we have, we have laws, we have police. If we make a mistake, police is going to come and catch us. At some point, we might have AI that acts as a police for other AIs to catch them, and there's a problem. I very much believe that is the future. The AI would be running on the very system that we have. It's just that we'll be more advanced. The way it's going, that how systems are progressing, there's a point of research that is trying to control these LLMs or point these LLMs or validate their answers by creating AI which specializes in validating them. So this is leading to where we can make this physical AI as well, which is going to control the ones, which make mistakes maybe. It's quite optimistic, but I think I'm good at picking indicators, and this is where it hints. Anyone would want to ask a question?
The plus.
Yes.
Was that done to get a better interpretation of the text, or was that just done due to font size limitations? Do you think there's another session work after this where we've got the new like million things where we can put the whole Quran in and ask straight from the text.
I think there was multiple reasons, and probably multiples. I would agree to what you have said. Number one, we wanted to be systematic about it, and I wanted to do in a structured and exhaustive way. Exhaustive in a way that I did not want to miss any verse. And then I wanted, again, in a systematic and structured manner, and I wanted to make sure when it's done, it's very similar to each other. And those were the main reasons I opted for clustering. It's more organized, and I can take somewhat trust that there would be some sort of relevance. But when you talk about other methods, I also thought and experimented with other methods, which will not be reported, but something, if you're familiar, called RAG, retrieval augmented knowledge, where you only retrieve, where we select what the themes are, or we first understand based on research from other researchers what are the main topics within Quran, or the scholarly people who study religion. We understand what the themes are. We put a theme, we retrieve the relevant verses, and then we try to portray that knowledge. Okay, with this theme, these are the verses out there, and then this is how it connects. We thought of that, but then again, I think it's just in my academic process that I wanted to be exhaustive, and I opted the method which could make sure everything was done to the precision. Yep.
Into the moral imperatives of the verses in question.
I do consider them representative, right? They do represent the message in there. But as Joe mentioned, that the verse itself holds meaning for people. Every verse, if you go into religious studies, there's a whole history of how that verse came into being. And when scholars go into deep studies, they learn about and they have a very good connection. I would consider it to be, as I said, representation and abridged knowledge, someone to understand what they would find in Quran or what does Quran represents, but I wouldn't consider it a replacement. Thank you. Yep.
Maybe you can't talk about this if you did do it. Maybe you left it out on purpose, but did you ask it questions like about the beliefs taught in the Quran? Like, or even things like, what is God's personality, or some core fundamental beliefs of is it Islam, right?
It's a very good question. You're talking about whether I ask a specific question or I analyze it in a specific way. I do have a proof of concept for that, and I have done that. Yes, that is available to me. That is a personal AI for me. If I am confused on something, I would ask it a question. And what it would do is it would find the verses which are relevant to my question or my query through a systematic process. And then it would answer my question based on those, those verses in a way that I get the knowledge. I mean, I am using AI in this way. And I thought of, academically representing it, but that is something not reliable. And then again, how does it interpret it? But that is there.
So my question was that, does it tend to align with what humans have already understood as fundamental beliefs out of that text, or does it diverge on some points that you wouldn't have thought about?
I wouldn't say I wouldn't even ask this question, really. The reason for that is, again, you have to be very careful how you create those prompts. Every word could lead to a different trigger, and we went through a systematic process to create those. So the question of whether it had its own opinion on religion or whether it contributed something, we made sure that didn't happen in the first place, because I didn't ask for LLM's opinion. I wanted it to do a job for me. Does that make sense?
So yeah, you mostly just used it for retrieval of
Exactly.
information.
The job of LLM was to, make it abridged, make it the best possible representation it could be of those verses. That was a rationale. And abridged knowledge in a very concise way, you know what are the top topics, and you understand what to expect on those topics without assuming, without interpreting, or without negating it or adding positivity to it. Thank you.
Done.
Yep, Sumaya Yasin. I think you can unmute yourself and it should be fine then.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. My worry
Mohammed,
is,
I'm gonna need you. I cannot hear her.
can you not hear me?
Cheers.
Hello there? Can you hear me?
Yep. Yes,
You're breaking up. Your voice is breaking up. Hello?
Is it better now?
Slightly, yes. Can you hear me? Is my voice clear?
Yep, it is very clear.
Okay, right. Thank you for your presentation. Mine is probably slightly digressing, but I attended a lecture a couple of weeks ago, and it's about, obviously AI is cost effective. It has lots of uses in many fields. But my worry is because there was obviously campaign where he was saying, "Oh, I am the healer, I am the guide." So basically, it was taking over God, Ash-Shafi, Al-Hadi, and I'm thinking, how can AI, can we trust AI and to interpret or do justice to the Quran? Hello?
Yep. I think I have understood you. I'm just sorry.
So
I'm just taking my time to construct the best answer that I can for your question.
Yeah, because obviously my fear is I'm a teacher, I'm a secondary school teacher, and we teach our students to be sensible with the social media, but I don't know if you heard of the person. He's called he's done a PhD from Imperial, Yaqub Chaudhry. And he's done obviously a lot of work, and they're part of an organization. There are lots of other people as well. So obviously AI, I'm of that opinion, and many other people are, is actually created for a godless society. So it's preparing people for the Dajjal, basically, to be honest. So I'm going to be very apprehensive to use AI, especially for religious studies, to have serious, honest connection with the religious texts. Can we trust AI?
I'll try to answer now. Thank you so much for your question. Sorry, can you mute? I can. Sumaya, we really appreciate your opinion, and I think whether we can trust AI or not, I am an AI specialist, and I have my own opinion, and then there is a wider populace that draw their opinion, and then there are companies and governments to answer that question. I feel we should use it in a controllable way. When I use AI methods or computational methods to analyze it, I try to make sure it is as controllable as possible. As I mentioned, when I was working with AI, I did not ask it for its opinion. I did not ask it to contribute. Its job was to help me find or provide abridged knowledge in the best representation, maintaining neutrality, making sure it is objective. And then other than that, that's LLMs. But before that, we have used machine learning. When we are working with this, it went through a statistical process. And we also mentioned that statistically, it might not cover all the overlapping themes. So there is that. not sure whether this answers your question. I do understand that you're of other opinions. I personally cannot relate with that. But yes, I do understand there is diversity in opinions. And personally, I believe if AI is controlled, if we are responsible, if we are ethical with it, rather than going towards cost efficiency, we also prefer safety. And there's a lot of works that every person does, or maybe I am someone who's not in those jobs. There are people who do dangerous jobs, or there are people who do repetitive jobs, who get a lot of injuries from their daily jobs. AI can help a lot there. And I mean, I am lost for words where AI could be beneficial, how AI could be beneficial. So that's what I can say, and that's where I am looking at. I want to play my part where I can to contribute to the body of knowledge in the best way possible. Yep.
Word cloud, because I, not being a Muslim, I can't state this categorically, but I would have thought that for practicing Muslims, most of those words that are on that word cloud would resonate with people who have an active faith. So I suppose I have a lot of nervousness with this, as you know, we've talked about this before, but I look at that word cloud and I think, actually, there are some really beautiful words in there. And from a chaplain's point of view, I would want to take some of those words, or maybe sit with that word cloud and see, how that chimes with people, how people relate to it. So I think I have fears about AI. I definitely have fears about AI, but I think what you've done here is really interesting. And I think my fears have been allayed somewhat by what you've shared with us tonight. And particularly, that's what I'm going to take away with me. I think that's really beautiful. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I personally believe, with all the research that has been done over the years, businesses have used it again and again. I would be lost for words when I talk about specific applications, how visualizations, looking at things and interpreting them, have been used again and again. You look at all that numerical data and qualitative data, and you put them in a visualization, it becomes more understandable. It is easier to share, it is easier to spread, easier to understand, and there are a lot of things out there. And I make sure when I started, I created those visualizations and spent a lot of effort in making sure it was correct. All the words, the person who has done it. So yeah, I think this is something that I want to continue and create as many of it possible in a meaningful way. Thank you so much. Anyone would like to ask anything? Is there anything online? All right, then. Yes, Honor.
But I can nuance states. And how for ChatGPT and behavior of these nuance and specific sentences. Because when we see keywords behind that words might not say as the word stuff.
I think I fully understand it. I would like to just step back in the methodology. Before the LLM analysis, if we look at somewhere on this page, before the LLM analysis, there was machine learning. At this step, what I did is, I was trying to find clusters. LLM job was summarizing. Yes, I'll come to that. But I would go a step back where I had to convert it into numerical form, right? That is another AI. That is another AI model, which converts a sentence into a numerical form. That there are different models for it. We use a text-to-vending model from OpenAI, which is the most leading one right now, or when this research was conducted. And that model is trained on, as I mentioned, a whole lot of data. It is able to draw some connections. That's my opinion. It's a black box model. We contribute to it, or we understand its behavior because we understand how it was trained. It does draw connections based on context, not just the word. It would look at the meaning, but other words have similar meaning, and it would cluster them together, not just on what the word is, what the meaning of the word is. So those models are capable of it, but as mentioned, it's not something that is definitive, not something that I can entirely say that, okay, it did that, it covered all those connections. These models make mistakes, but it might not be as good. And I have proposed, in order to make sure it understands all those connections and contexts better, we can make it a specialist. We could fine tune it, as you would understand, with some religious knowledge or a lot of religious knowledge, so that it can do a better job. Does that make sense? And the same can be said for the ChatGPT one. ChatGPT again is a whirlwind of knowledge. Then there are cases where we can fine tune it to be a specialist for a certain case. That makes sense?
Unfortunately, we don't have any more time, but yeah, thank you very much, everyone. I think Usama will be hanging around for a few minutes here. If you have any more questions for him, please do feel free to ask him. And thank you very much for the speaker of this evening, Usama Shahid. Thank you very much.